Exodus chapter 16, it says, verse 1, and they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after their departing out of the land of Egypt. Something struck me in that verse. It caught my attention about the blood moon this past Sunday night. And it was this, the date in verse 1 of chapter 16, which is the 15th day of the second month. And this year, sometimes dates on the Hebrew calendar and dates on the American calendar will sometimes fall on the same day. Maybe different months, the same date. That was the case this past Sunday. This past Sunday was night, when the blood moon appeared, was the 15th day of the month of May, which is the 5th month on the American calendar. But also, this past Sunday on the Hebrew calendar was the 15th day of the second month. So you had different months between the American calendar and the Hebrew calendar, but you had the same dates on the same day. And that was interesting. And this date, the 15th day of the second month on the Hebrew calendar, some people like to put names to the Hebrew calendars. That was a tradition that came later after the Babylonian captivity. Before that, in the time of Moses, they just put the number of the month. They didn't have a name for the month. They just put a number. And so you'll see in the Exodus account, it gives you the number of the month, but it doesn't give you the name of the month. Whereas in Judaism and some Hebrews, they'll say, this is the month of this. They'll give it those Babylonian names. I prefer to just stay with the numbers. Okay, so Sunday night was when the blood moon appeared. The date was the 15th, and this was the 15th day of the second month, the same day mentioned in verse 1 of Exodus, which meant, when it says the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt, if you notice, when we had Passover in April, it was on April the 15th, which was about a month ago. The Hebrew New Year began on April the 1st. So in April, the 15th day of April, apart from being for many a day of misery, it's tax day, but apart from that, that was our Passover. It always comes in the middle of the month. Passover always comes in the middle of the month. And so April 15th, we had Passover. It was on a Friday night. And Sunday night was on the Hebrew calendar, the 15th day of the second month. So with this count, we're looking at the children of Israel in this book, in this section, are exactly 1 month having come out of Egypt. Now, this weekend, as we reflect on the 1 month anniversary of when they came out of Egypt. It just so happened on this 15th day of the second month, we had a blood moon. Now, I'm not a scientist, and we got a school teacher. We got two school teachers on the line here uh, with Elder Aaron and Emma Deborah, these school teachers. But one thing I know, and I don't have a BS degree, I have a BA degree, but, and I'm not a scientist, but the 15th day of a month is when the moon is full. It is the phase of the moon when it's a full moon. The full moon always comes in the middle of the month, which is roughly around the 15th day of the month. And whenever there's a blood moon can only happen when there's a full moon. So there was a full moon Sunday night, and it was a blood moon, which means there was enough of the moon to refract the light from the sun to make the light appear on the moon to be reddish. That's as best I can explain it. I'm sure there's better technical ways of explaining it, but if I go too much further trying to break that down, I might get myself in trouble. Yet, what do blood moons? What's the significance of a blood moon lining up on the same day of the anniversary date of this verse in Exodus chapter 16, verse 1? Okay, the significance of the blood moon sign on this past Sunday, which on the 15th day of the second month, during these days of what we call the Omer period, between Passover and Shavuot, Feast of Weeks. As you know, we have been keeping somewhat of a vigil of awareness that starting from April until June the 4th, there should be 7 Shabbats, 7 weekly Shabbats. And since I believe it was April the 23rd, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, roughly, somewhere around there. I don't have my calendar with me, but about a week after the Passover, which will bring us roughly to April the 3rd, April the 23rd, we will have 7 Shabbats leading up to June the 4th, and then on June the 5th, we will have the Feast of Pentecost, or Shavuot, the 50th day after Passover. Some interesting information there. All right, so this period of time, when this blood moon appeared, is the period of time we call the days of the Omer, which represents the day of the first budding spring crops, the first buds of the spring crops that were traditionally presented in the temple as a wave offering before Yah to bless the harvest, the spring harvest. You know, Israel had 2 seasonal harvests. One harvest was in the spring, and one harvest was in the fall. Certain crops blossom and can be harvested in the spring, and then certain crops you have to wait all the way till the fall for the harvest. So the spring harvest is the period of the Omer, which means the spring sheath or early buds for the spring harvest. So this blood moon appeared Now, there's significance to blood moons, the way Yeshua was teaching about blood moons. Yeshua taught in Luke 21, verse 24 through 25. The Yeshua is explaining to his disciples the significance of signs in the heavens. And this is the way he explains it. Verse 24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. As you know, the term Gentiles, it has a general term, which means any nation other than the Israelite nation. So any other nation of people other than the Israelites were called Gentiles or Goyim. But as time went on, and in reference to that, you can look in Genesis chapter 10, verse 5. Eventually, the term Gentile became more synonymously known with a particular segment of nationalities of people, particularly from Europe. And it became more of a term that came to mean Western Gentile Europeans. And so when you look at it from the vantage point of the way Yeshua is breaking it down, he said that in verse 24, they shall fall by the edges of the sword, shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Then what we're dealing with is the Gentiles that were ruling in the time of Yeshua. Yeshua says that when their time ends to rule, in verse 35, he said there would be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. And upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. So when we have a blood moon, you have a sign in the sun, the refraction of its light on a moon, a full moon, creates a blood red appearance. So this is a sign on the sun and the moon. And then, what does it mean? In the stars. And in the stars. Now we understand timekeeping, or the sun, the moon, and stars. Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, according to that, it says that the sun and the moon and the stars were made for signs and for seasons. Verse 14 of Genesis chapter 1, and Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. The Hebrew word for seasons is moed. Now, a lot of us think that when he's saying seasons, you're talking about fall, winter, spring, summer. But that's not what that word means. The word seasons here, it comes from a Hebrew word moed, which means special appointed times. You can go into Strong's Concordance, can look that up, Strong's 4150. So when Yeshua is saying signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, you align what he's saying with what is said in Genesis, that the sun and the moon and And the stars are indicators when certain seasons are coming forth. We know that the sun and the moon help us measure the days of a year and of our months. We know that. Okay. But also the stars are used for timekeeping. And that's a little more controversial in understanding this blue blood moon in relation to the stars, but we're going to give it a try. One thing we clearly want to say, many times when people try to understand the signs and the seasons by the days and the months, there's usually not much contention about that. But when you start trying to read time by the stars, well, now all of a sudden people start getting a little nervous about that because that starts sounding somewhat like astrology. And we're not talking about astrology here. We're talking about astronomy. And that time, astrology is a method of fortune telling for using the stars. And fortune telling had to do with magic and witchcraft, that sort of thing. We're nowhere near going to cover or deal with that. That's forbidden in scripture. So, however, the stars we are told in Genesis 1, verse 14, and we're told by Yeshua that the stars are also for signs. They're also for signs. And so we're going to make an attempt to understand if there's a blood moon on the 15th day of the second month, then how do the stars factor in the significance of that? And the only way you can do that is, the only way we can tell time by the stars is by the word used in Hebrew. It's called Mazaroth. And Mazaroth is the term of using stars for timekeeping. It's in the book of Job. And if you go to the book of Job, which may be actually the oldest book in the Bible, but in Job chapter 38, it says this, or rather Job chapter, let's go to Job chapter 38, keep it there. In Job chapter 38, and in verse, let's go to verse Job chapter 38 and verse 31. Canst thou bind the sweet influence of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Artaxerxes with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Now, Job is being told by Yah that there's a system of seasonal time called Mazaroth, but it's seasonal time that's dealing not just with the seasons that we know of as summer, spring, winter, and fall, but it's also, he says in verse 3, verse 33, it's determining the rise and fall of different dominions or rulerships in the earth. Now, I have come to a conclusion in putting all these terms together about the significance of the blood moon this past Sunday. What I've come to see is that the blood moon on that date that's mentioned in scripture in Exodus chapter 16, verse 1, that there was something that is for us to keep our eyes and ears alert to. I can't make any predictions or forecast prophetically, but I could say there's some evidence, some things the Holy Spirit wants us to see. Now, as far as setting dates, I can't do that. But this is what I'm noticing. Okay, if we're looking at the sun and the moon involved in the sign of the blood moon, a blood moon is usually a sign that's not a good sign for Israel. It's more like a warning. Say, for instance, when you're driving down the road and you see a red light flashing behind you, is that a good sign? Think about that. Why does it have to be a red light when an ambulance is coming through? A red light's not a good sign, is it? That means when you see a red light, it's like danger, you know. Watch out. It's a warning. It's a warning, right? Get out of the way. So the conclusion I'm coming from is this is some sort of warning. Blood moon is a warning. Okay, now, and it's a warning to the Israelites particularly. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's a particular, you know, with the moon and the sun, the blood moon. But what did the star? How did the stars factor in? Because Yeshua says the stars also factor in with these signs in the heaven. The only thing I could think of is in the Mazzaroth, as was mentioned in Job. The Mazzaroth is a transition of star formations that is called, in the English language, zodiac. And, you know, of course, people run for cover from that word because it sounds like you're veering off into astrology. So really the better word is not zodiac, it would be the biblical word Mazzaroth, that there are 12 stations of stars. There's 12 stations of stars. The Hebrews called it Mazzaroth. They didn't use the word zodiac. All right, so what of those 12 stations of stars, the first one of those stations, and this is from some sacred literature of Israelite timekeeping. Some of these sacred literature books like Enoch, they're not sacred scripture, but they're sacred literature. And sometimes, you know, the sacred scriptures like the Bible, they can either give validity to what's in the sacred literature, or it can deny it validity. But in this case, it appears, after you read Job, that there is some validity that the sacred scriptures give to, say, for instance, the sacred literature of the book of Enoch, which calls the Mazzaroth these 12 gates of the heavens, rather than calling it zodiac. All right, the first gate would be in you know, late December, and then you would have another one in late January. Then you'd have another one in late March. I think somebody just had a birthday in late March. Just turned 76.
Yeah.
Okay. Hallelujah for that. Okay.
Blessing.
Yes. So that was the third gate of star formations in the Mazda. Okay. Now you have a fourth gate, which came in April. No, it came in late. It came in late March. That's the third gate. Then you have the fourth gate that began in late April. And it's in this fourth gate that the blood moon appeared. Now, this fourth gate is traditionally called Taurus, and it's symbolized by a bull. And there's a lot of research and review that each of these 12 gates represent something about the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm sure some of us have heard of that. And you know, each of the 12 tribes of Israel had symbols to represent their tribe. Like, for instance, what's the symbol for the tribe of Judah?
Lion.
The lion. Okay. Now, then what tribe? Because when you talk about the Stargate time for the fourth gate, is the symbol of a bull called Taurus. What tribe of the Israelites had a banner with the bull or the calf or something like that? And there is one tribe. It's called Ephraim. That was the tribe of Ephraim. So was the bull, the calf. All right. The cow type creature, if you want to put it that way. All right. What's the blood moon significant about that tribe? But also, Yeshua said, the sun and the moon and the stars, they also are witnesses of the fall of world powers. And I've really been struggling with, how is the tribe of Ephraim connected with Gentile world powers? Because Yeshua is saying this is supposed to be a sign, the signs in the heavens, about the fall of Gentile world powers. Well, it dawned on me that there is a tribe called Ephraim, a tribe that was blessed to be the fullness of the Gentiles. That's right. We did a lesson on this previously. If you go to the book of Genesis, chapter, go to Genesis chapter 48 and look at the blessing that Jacob put on Ephraim. This is interesting. Chapter 48 of Genesis. And listen to the blessing in verse 19 that Jacob puts upon Ephraim. All right. I'm going to just pick up at verse 17. Now Ephraim is the son of Joseph, who is the son of Jacob. Now, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head." Now, Ephraim was not Joseph's firstborn. He was Joseph's secondborn. And Joseph thought maybe his father in his old age, just couldn't make out the difference between Ephraim and his brother Manasseh, who was actually older. But no, Jacob could see who it was. And we read verse 19, and his father, Jacob, refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He shall also become a people, that is Manasseh, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother, which is Ephraim, shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Now, this is the only son of the 12 tribes of Israel that is told that his tribe will become a multitude of nations. Now, that's interesting because this wasn't said of Judah, this wasn't said of Levi, or any of the other tribes. This is the kind of blessing that was put on Abraham. He would be the father of many nations, and even Isaac. He would be the father of many nations, but there's never a reference except to one of the 12 boys of Jacob that he would be the father of many nations. And in this case, the father of many nations not only means he's a father biologically to many nations, but it also is in the context that he's a father to these nations spiritually. Just like Abraham is the father of many nations. And in the book of Galatians, it says that there are people that are his actual biological children. That's what the Israelites are. But then there are those who by faith in Yeshua have taken hold of the covenant that are not biological Israelites, but they are Gentiles who have taken on salvation through Yeshua. Then they too become a spiritual seed of Abraham. They're not the biological seed, but they become spiritual children of Abraham. Now, how can such a process be conferred on Ephraim, one of the 12, one of the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel? How is that possible? To make a long story short, how does this blood moon relate to Ephraim, whose symbol is the bull, the cow, the calf, the star symbol for this period of time that we call Taurus? How is it related to him? We know on his banner was the symbol of the bull. So let's review this. If these signs in the sun, moon, and stars are the time of witness to the end of the Gentile age, that's the way Yeshua explained these signs in Luke 21, 24, and 25. Then let's investigate just briefly what this means in terms of the time of judgment on things related to a part of Israel, particularly the part of Israel related to Ephraim. This red moon, or this blood moon, this Friday night, well, it appears, based on what has happened since Friday, some things have happened that have given me opportunity to better gauge the sense of the tribe of Ephraim in relation to the blood moon, because the warning to them of danger approaching, to that particular tribe, it's coming as a warning of danger from a group or a race of people that are also a danger to all of the tribes of Israel. But it's the blood moon, the emergency warning red sign, the emergency red light is something related to the tribe of Ephraim. A lot of people want to know, who is Ephraim today? And Ephraim had two different diasporas. Some of them actually fled down into Africa, and some of them are in Nigeria, and some of them, many of them came in slavery to America. The Ephraimite people in Nigeria were predominantly big in the group of people called the Yoruba. They have a group of people among the Yoruba, not all of them. There is now a recognized genetic DNA tribal group of people within the Yoruba tribe who are the tribe of Ephraim. Yet that part of Ephraim is not the part of Ephraim that fulfills this prophecy. Just like Judah scattered all over the world, but it's the part of Judah that's in America that fulfills a lot of prophecy. The other parts of Judah are just on standby, waiting. And that gets kind of complicated. I don't want to make it too complicated beyond what it is or beyond what I can explain it. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But when we really track Ephraim, we have a scripture that tells us how they were scattered. It's in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 16. 2 Kings, chapter 16. And if you will go to actually, let's go to chapter 17 of 2 Kings, and let us go to verse 4, 5, and 6. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up against all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala and in Habar by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. Now, here we see in those 3 verses, some of the northern tribes whose capital was Samaria. They had by this time, around 720 BC, they had separated from the southern kingdom of Judah. The southern kingdom of Judah comprised Judah, Levi, and Benjamin. They had their own kingdom. And the northern tribes, the other 10, which included Ephraim, they had their own kingdom that was generally called Israel or Samaria, which was the capital. And the most powerful tribe among the northern kingdom was Ephraim. And sometimes you'll see in biblical passages among the prophets that the northern kingdom is sometimes called as well Ephraim. The whole northern 10 tribes sometimes are called Ephraim in different references. Don't have time to go there now, but it's there. You can Google it. So here in this account, in 720 BC, 2,700 years ago, all of those tribes, including Ephraim, some of them went down into Africa, because we seen some of them went down to Egypt for refuge or for deal making to survive. And some of them stayed in Egypt and later eventually moved all over Africa and went as far as Nigeria, where they are today. And then many of them got called and brought here, the tribe of Ephraim. But most of them did not go there. Most of them were captured by the Assyrians in verse 6 and were taken to the northeast into the region of the Caucasus Mountains in Asia, near West Asia, near Eastern Asia, in places like Iran, Armenia, places as Georgia, the Caucasus Mountains. And these are the areas in Turkey, northern Iraq, and so forth. So most of the Ephraimites were taken in the regions of the children of Japheth. That's where places like Gozan and Hala were located. And of course, the cities of the Medes were children of Japheth. These were Gentiles. These are children of Noah's son Japheth. So they got mixed with the Gentiles. They became so mixed with the Gentiles in those areas. Listen to what Hosea the prophet says of that. If you go to Hosea chapter 7 and verse 8. Hosea chapter 7 and verse 8. And it says, verse 8 of Hosea chapter 7. Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. I want us to notice this. He has mixed himself up among the people till he's like a cake that hasn't been turned over. Now, when you make a cake with flour, that cake will look white. It doesn't become brown till you turn it over. Okay, well, Ephraim, this verse is saying because he mixed himself among the Caucasian people in those northern regions. Most Ephraimites no longer look black. They originally were black. They no longer look black. They, through intermixing, intermarriage, they now look white. Say, for instance, one of my favorite basketball players in the past was a young man named Blake Griffin. Okay, now Blake Griffin was a father. He had a father who was a Hebrew, who was black. His father married a blonde, blue-eyed girl, Blake's mother. Okay, so Blake came out, and you can see how he looked. He's a light-skinned brother, but he's an Israelite because of his daddy. Okay, now, Blake married a blonde, blue-eyed girl also, like his daddy did. So Blake, I wish I had the picture here. When Blake's child was born through Blake's blonde, blue-eyed wife, his son looks like a blonde, blue-eyed white boy. How can that be? Wait a minute. Well, again, that's the phenotype. That is hair and skin color. Even though that son of Blake looks white, that boy's genetic DNA is ancient Israelite bloodlines through his grandfather, Blake's father, which goes from father to father. So yes, he looks white, but he's really from a black people. Does that make sense? Well, that's what happened to the Ephraimites. They became isolated in areas where they married European Caucasian girls in a period of time. You can't identify them different from the people they lived among. Now, the white people they mixed with weren't necessarily the blonde, blue-eyed type, because they were more like, your Southern Mediterranean looking type white people from Europe, like Italians, Greeks, and okay, most of what we call Jewish people today look like that. They have, and the biggest tribe among the exiles of the 10 tribes that were carried away, they married, intermarried, and their colors changed. And it's so conveniently easy just to say that all of them who are Jewish people today are Edomites, or they are Khazarians, and sure they did intermix with all of those people, no doubt, particularly the Khazarians. And much of the people today we call Jewish people, like Seinfeld and Woody Allen, and a lot of them, well, just by looking at them, you can't see any original Israelite bloodline to them. They look more like the Turkic and Caucasian peoples that they were exiled to by the Assyrians 2,700 years ago. All right. Now, the truth of the matter is, thanks to DNA genetics, among the Jewish people, now this is what we have to look at. Among the Jewish people, their DNA of about 4% of them goes back to original ancient Israelite DNA bloodline that the Hebrews possessed. That is, the Hebrew bloodline DNA that we are here in America, and this is now genetically verified. I've done the test, and I've dealt with brothers that have done the test. There was one DNA bloodline that remains the most constant bloodline among all of us. It's E1B1A, which is the ancient Israelite bloodline. It did not originate in West Africa. It originated in the Middle East. But we migrated to West Africa, where we ended up being captured and sent into slavery. But it's amazing that in spite of all of the randomness of how we were captured as slaves, brought to America, the genetic history still comes out that for practically 90% of us, of the men, it still ends up being ancient Israelite, Middle Eastern E1B1A. And that's mind-boggling. See, now we have evidence to dispel a lot of assumptions and misrepresentations about who we are, even though the Bible had always accurately said it. But now, among the Jewish people today, only about 4% of them have any ancient Israelite DNA. There's 4% of them that have the same DNA that Elder Haron and I have. All right. And these are people that don't look like Elder Haron and myself. These are people that can look all kind of ways, just like Blake Griffith's son. Looking at his son, you can't tell that young man has any black or Hebrew blood in him, but he does, and he's a Hebrew. And that's the case here with Ephraim. Ephraim, it said in Hosea 7:8, has been so mixed. He's like a cake not turned. That is, his MO is that he's no longer looking black. He's looking white, like flour, a cake not turned. So this, then, of this blood moon, since it appeared at the time of Taurus, which is the symbol of the bull, which is a symbol for Ephraim, then that means this blood moon is a sign of danger to Ephraim. Now, of course, 96% of the Jewish people are not Israelites. 96% of them are not Israelites. I mean, this is just the honest truth. This is not in any way hating on anybody, to just tell the truth. Okay, yet whatever that there is of their connection to Israelites, to ancient Israelites that we are, is either that their ancestors are, for 4% of them, actually bloodline relatives of us, the original Israelites, or else the 96% of them are Ephraimites through religious conversion, by conversion. So that means 96% of them would be converts. Now, of course, Jacob had said that Ephraim would be the father of many nations. And that would mean then that the converts to Ephraim that make up 96% of Jewish people, these are more like adopted children to the tribe of Ephraim. In other words, Ephraim, just like Jacob had prayed over him, will be the father of many nations, primarily through religious conversion or adoption. Not the blood, they're not bloodline, but they are adopted children. And so Ephraim is comprised mostly of adopted converts, but there are among the Ephraimites who look white. There's 4% of them that are real deal Israelites. But just like Blake Griffith's son, you can't know it by looking at it. So we just have to be honest about this. So the blood moon is a sign and a witness to the white Israelites. And do you know, since the blood moon happened, something has happened in the Middle East. Over the weekend, around the time that the blood moon appeared, towards the state of Israel. Because see, state of Israel was founded and established by white Jewish people. And white Jewish people are the power that runs the state of Israel. These would be your European Jewish people. 4% of them are real Israelites. It's verified. 96% of them, if there's any connection to Israel, is by adoption through religious conversion. And so they're predominantly converts. Now, the blood moon sign was a warning to them, and something happened this weekend. They were fired upon by an enemy that is also an enemy to you and us as well, the real Israelites. The state of Israel has been bombing a lot in Syria. They have been bombing Iranians and other hostile groups in Syria, like Hezbollah, the Syrians themselves, for a long time. But those hostile groups had an ally with them, a very powerful ally that has a military base there, and that's Russia. For the first time since Russia has built a military base in Syria, this weekend when the blood moon appeared, the Russian anti-aircraft missiles were fired at Israeli planes bombing in Syria during the time of this blood moon. So that's, in summing this all up, what does this mean? It's indicating that something disastrous is coming on the state of Israel. Russia has warned Israel that it won't tolerate them just going in bombing as usual everywhere. Now, the Israelis know better than to bomb the Russians that are there, but the Russians are now, they're fighting one war in Ukraine, and they need all the allies they can get from other parts of the world because they're running out of soldiers. So they're more or less telling Iran and Hezbollah and others of those countries there, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll fire at the ones who are coming against you, and I'll need you to come and help me fire at the Ukrainians that are fighting me. It's going on like that right now. And this falls in line with a prophecy in chapter 17 of the book of Isaiah. In the prophecy of Isaiah, it talks about a war out of Syria that will bring down the state of Israel. All right. If you go to Isaiah chapter 17, this blood moon is revealing, it's a warning about something that's really close on us. And so we really need to take our time and review what's being said in chapter 17 of Isaiah. The first three verses really catch your eye. The burden of Damascus. The burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aroer are forsaken. They shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress shall also cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith Yahweh of hosts. Now, this is interesting that the blood moon, during the time of the sign of Ephraim, in verse 3, it says that the fortress shall cease from Ephraim. There's one translation or version, a very ancient version of this verse 3 of chapter 17 that's in the oldest Semitic language text of this passage. It's called the Targum Text, which is more like a paraphrase of a Hebrew translation. It says a little more clear. It says, the government shall cease from Ephraim. It's speaking as though that the government of what we call today the state of Israel is about to end. And the government of the state of Israel has been the main obstruction to Israelites here from being able to move over into the land. Ever since I've lived in the Chicago area, the goal and plan that even Deborah and I had was to go to Israel. Well, we didn't have the means or the resources to go when we initially moved in the Chicago area, but we were blessed to have made contacts like Elder Haron and others where we grew into truth about Israel during this 27-year period. And we were both able to retire where we got pensions, Social Security, where we can live without working. We could go to Israel now, but the state of Israel says you can't come unless you convert into Judaism and deny you believe in Yeshua. And we're not going to do it that way. We're not going to do it the way some others have done that did that. Some of who you know. Some of them are in Des Moines, and some of them are in other places. We refuse to go in that way because that's the wrong way to go in. So we have to wait till Yah deals with the people in control of the land of Israel to get them out of our way. And it looks like right now the blood moon is a forewarning sign to them that they're about to be taken out of the way, because the fact that most of what we call Ephraim today are Gentiles that are from Gentile countries in Europe primarily. Their religion is Judaism, but their racial identity is European. Then when the blood moon, as Yeshua said, is a sign of the fall of the Gentiles, that means that because so many of them are really Gentiles, the fall of the government that they have set up as the state of Israel is about to fall. And the fact that it falls at a time described in Isaiah 17 because of a war in Syria, where even the capital of Syria, which is Damascus, will fall, which is the oldest continuous city in the world. Damascus has continued uninterrupted as a city since biblical era times. It has never ceased from being a city. But here we see Isaiah says it will be destroyed in a war. And when that happens, the government of Ephraim that we call the state of Israel will fall. And that's what the blood moon seems to be a harbinger of. This weekend when it came, and Israel was bombing in Syria as they normally do, unabated. This time, the anti-aircraft missiles from Russia fired at the Israeli airplanes. They didn't really aim to really knock them out, but it was like a show of strength, like, don't do this anymore. Okay, so the state of Israel said today, we got to keep our eyes on news all around the world. Thanks goodness with YouTube, we can go to any country in the world and see what the news is, because just about all of them have English news services. And today, the defense secretary of the state of Israel said, nothing will stop us from doing what we're doing. And that was a threat to Russia. And you know, Russia at this point is a dangerous entity that's desperate. And the state of Israel has never really been in a position to fight Russia, ever. Never, not now, not ever. And so it is thoroughly unprepared for that kind of confrontation. So the sign of the blood moon this Sunday night, and then the events that happened with Russia, Israel, and Syria are indicating to us that the state of Israel, that sign of the blood moon is a sign and a warning to the state of Israel that it's about to fall in a war. Now, if we understand who Russia is, and we talked about that last week, Russia are the Amalekites, and their leader, the Russians today, are controlled by the Amalekites. And we showed how the Amalekites merged in what was Rome. This is in the book of Jasher, chapter 90, verse 30. And the Amalekites and all of the Edomites became united with the Romans. And then we also know that Rome moved from Italy to Asia Minor. And then we know that Rome became settled into Russia. Let me show you just this clip real fast to illustrate that point again.
European history with Dr. Brovkin, and today we will talk about Russia in this during the times of Reformation, the 16th century. What was going on in the east of Europe? And we haven't talked at all about Russia, so it needs some introduction, a very basic introduction. So now we come to the 1400s. This is the time of the Renaissance in Italy. What does Russia look like at that time? There is no Russia yet. Nominally, there's still. Okay, I'm going to have to stop and ask. They're splintered into these small principalities, and little by little, Moscow, as Moscow prince, asserts his dominance by clever manipulation of tax collection, by delivering it quicker and better to the Mongols, and he kind of is primus inter pares, which is first among equals of these Slavic princes. And then comes the important first name that is truly crucial. It's Ivan III, and he rules at the time of Italian Renaissance in the middle of the 1400s. Now, if you recall, 1452 is the most important date in Eastern Europe, and that's the conquest of Constantinople by the Turks. So the center of Orthodox religion is no longer in the hands of the Greeks and Orthodox. It's taken over by the Muslims. And that creates a kind of a strange situation. Russia begins to, or Muscovy begins to feel that they are the ones that picked up the banner, and that they keep up sort of the center, being the center of the orthodoxy, now that the Turks took over Constantinople. What really moves this process further is the marriage of Ivan III to Sophia, who was a niece of the last Byzantine emperor. So she was the daughter of the brother of the last Byzantine emperor. She was brought up in Italy, but she was royal blood. I mean, she was basically the Byzantine emperors, princes who was of the last reigning monarch. And she marries Ivan III. And that brings enormous changes to Russia. Well, let's call it Moscow because that's what it was at the time. Sophia brings a lot of Italian customs, architects. The Italians come with her and they spread their influence. So the Muscovites begin to be familiarized with Italian ways and what's going on. And that process will continue. So if you look at the Kremlin today, it looks identical to the one in Milan. It's pretty much the same. Or when we were in Bologna, the city walls in Bologna look very much like in Moscow. It's because these were Italian architects that were building those for the grandson of Ivan III, who is known as Ivan IV or Ivan the Terrible. So one other thing that's credited to Sophia, that her son Vasily is the father of Ivan the Fourth. Apparently, she had an enormous influence in disseminating the idea that Russia should be like Byzantine Empire, should inherit the seat of orthodoxy, and basically, it happens in that Vasily adopts the title of Caesar. It's apparently his wife who's been telling him, you should be strong, you should be like the Byzantium used to be, you should be an emperor, you should be a Caesar. And he does take that role and this title. So the title Tsar is actually a Russian pronunciation of Caesar.
Okay, now you see how Moscow is the third Rome. And it raised its weapons against the state of Israel during the time of the phases of the blood moon, during this time of the symbol in the Mazzaroth of the bull, which is the symbol for Ephraim. Their days are numbered, saints. Basically, we all need to just be patient, because when it describes in Isaiah 17, the taking down of the state of Israel, it will be so horrendous that their cities in chapter 17 will be totally thrown. Cities like Tel Aviv, like Haifa, modern cities like Beersheba, Dimona, they're getting ready to be devastated. This war is coming. And based on what I've seen, the appearance of Russia into the equation is also a threat to us over here in America as well, because while they're talking about threatening America with their supersonic nuclear weapons that America doesn't have a defense for, well, keep in mind now, the devil is willing to destroy both Russia and America to destroy the Israelites, the chosen people. So Yah sees for us that we can't be here very long. We can't stay in America, but we can't go to Israel. So like we're right now like our people were in the days of the Omer, when they left Egypt and they couldn't go across the Red Sea, but they couldn't go back into Egypt. And then that's when Yah entered in.